Are you pregnant and wondering if you have a tight pelvic floor that may negatively impact your delivery? Let's find out the answers. If you are pregnant and new to my channel, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell below so you don't miss any of my pelvic floor tips for an empowering maternity journey. We often hear people talking about weak pelvic floor muscles, but did you know that your pelvic floor muscles could actually be tight? Indeed, like any other muscles in your body, the pelvic floor muscles can also develop tensions. As mentioned before in other videos, your baby will need to go through your pelvic floor muscles during your pushing stage. So if you are aiming for a smooth vaginal birth, we really want those muscles to be as flexible and as relaxed as possible to improve your chances of success and avoid tearing. So let's review 3 signs that your pelvic floor may be tight, and at the end of the video, I'll direct you to some resources to move forward. The first sign of pelvic floor tightness that I see most commonly in clinic with my patients is pain with penetrative sex. When the penis comes in the vagina, it has to go through the pelvic floor muscles at the opening. So if, despite using lubricant, it is very tight there during that initial penetration, or even worse, the penetration is not even possible because there is simply not enough space, then it is very likely that you have a tight pelvic floor. Fortunately, there are ways to stretch that vaginal opening and the pelvic floor muscles using what we call vaginal dilators. And I have a full tutorial on how to use those in the description below. So feel free to watch that video after if that is your case. But I like to get my clients started on dilator work as early as possible in pregnancy if they have those symptoms. Just so we can address those tensions as soon as possible and make sure that their pelvic floor is ready for labor on time. Now, the pain could also be felt deeper in the vagina where those kind of deep pelvic floor muscles layers are located. So you can imagine that when the penis hits those deeper layers there, it kind of pokes the pelvic floor muscles, and if they're tight, it can be experienced as a sharp, deep pain in the vagina. And what my clients often report is, it feels like my partner is hitting my cervix and it hurts. But in a lot of cases, it's not the actual cervix that triggers the pain, rather than the pelvic floor muscles themselves. The second sign that may suggest a tight pelvic floor is having painful bowel movement. Because your pelvic floor muscles are around your rectum and anus, having a tight pelvic floor can actually lead to painful bowel movement. Again, from lack of space around the rectum, from that compression of the pelvic floor. So especially if you're dealing or have dealt with hemorrhoids or anal fissures, it is possible that your pelvic floor has learned to tense up when you poo as a protection response and has developed that kind of tense pattern, right? But that protective response is counterproductive, because if you think about it, it would be much less painful if there was more space around the rectum when your stool goes through, as opposed to reducing the space by squeezing the pelvic floor muscles. The third sign of pelvic floor tension is overactive bladder. So in pregnancy, it is expected that you may pee more frequently than usual, and we expect normally every 2 to 3 hours. But if you're visiting the bathroom every 30 to 60 minutes, it is definitely a red flag for pelvic floor tightness, and I'll explain why those two things can be connected. So when your bladder fills up with urine, there is pressure that builds up on the bladder walls, and there are sensors on those bladder walls that sends a signal to your brain saying, "Hey Sophie, you gotta go pee soon." Now, your bladder is sitting right on top of your pelvic floor. This is your pelvic floor here, this is your bladder. So when you have a tight pelvic floor, it presses on the bladder walls and it creates that pressure from the outside. And the sensors in the bladder walls are kind of picking up on it. The sensors in your bladder are not smart enough to identify if that pressure is coming from the inside of your bladder, from the urine building up, or from the outside of your bladder, which would be more your pelvic floor in that case. So it just keeps sending signals saying, hey Sophie, you gotta pee soon, even though you just went to the bathroom half an hour ago. And so that doesn't make sense, right? Plus, when you're pregnant, we also have pressure coming from the top of our bladder from our growing baby. So imagine that your bladder is basically being squeezed between your tight pelvic floor, your growing baby, right? So do you see why you always need to go pee now and why you're having those sensations? How to move forward if you're dealing with these symptoms? Well, first off, I have 2 great videos for you in the description below where I show release exercises and self-massage techniques to unwind the tensions in your pelvic floor. So I would highly recommend you start with that. These are techniques you can use during pregnancy to soften your pelvic floor and let go of these tensions. Second, your best bet to confirm if you do have a tight pelvic floor is always to consult with a pelvic health physiotherapist. So make sure you work with someone who can do internal work and intravaginal assessments because it is the most reliable way to assess if your pelvic floor is tight. As always, if you have not grabbed my free prenatal book to get started on a proactive approach to prepare your pelvic floor for a positive birth experience, it is ready for you in the description below. Thanks for watching.